Hello everyone. Hello, good evening, and welcome to tonight's Stowe Talks. Now, you'll know what tonight's session is about because you signed up for it. Tonight's session is about creating your family through donor conception. Now, tonight's topic is fascinating, and it's at times like tonight where I'm reminded that whilst I call myself a family lawyer, the area of family law in which I actually practice is a very small part of the family law legal world. Now, you'll have heard me talking before, perhaps, about divorce. That's my main area. And I have to confess that donor conception isn't my area. And so I'm very pleased that I've got colleagues who are specialists in donor conception actually joining me this evening. So we'll get some proper law from some proper lawyers in this area, which is great. Now, I found generally, obviously, unless you're going through this or you are an expert helping a family, it's likely that your knowledge about donor conception will be fairly low. You might have registered for this webinar because you have an interest in the subject, whether you're someone with a personal experience or you might be a family member of someone going through donor conception. You might be a counsellor, a lawyer looking to learn more, or even a student. We absolutely welcome you in whatever capacity you are here in. Welcome to Stowe. Now, we may well have a lot of new listeners, which I would fully expect for tonight's session. It's a big welcome to you. We may only see you for this session because it is obviously an extremely niche topic, but that's great. If you like this, we might be doing another one. I'd like to delve deeper into this subject. We have a lot of different avenues which we can go down, but let us have your feedback and we'll take it from there. Feel free, obviously, to make suggestions for other topics as well. Now, tonight, we've got quite a lot to cover. We're going to cover what donor conception is. We're going to cover things to consider when thinking about donor conception. We're going to be looking at the support available for people considering donor conception and donor conceived families. Now, we're going to be also talking to a donor conceived child. Principally, I think what you might be here to hear as well tonight is about the legal complexities and the things to consider. Okay, so the experts in the house tonight are Nina Barnsley from the Donor Conception Network. She's got a huge wealth of knowledge and a lovely cracking smile. I don't think there's anything she doesn't know, which is fabulous. We've also got Gemma Davison, who's one of our team leader partners in Oxford and Banbury. She specialises in fertility law. So she also covers surrogacy. She covers donor conception, obviously, platonic co-parenting, single parenting by choice. And we've got Liza Gatrell with us as well tonight, which is great. Now, she's one of our partners. She deals with family law as well. Fertility law as well as a specialist. Now, she's more slightly different area of the country. I think she covers Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire and Dorset. I hope I've got that right. We've really got the whole country covered between us, actually, the three of us today. Isn't that great for covering off the whole of England? Wow, that's quite impressive. Now, all our guests have impressive CVs and they are true leaders in their field. You won't necessarily know that we have leaders in this field because it is a very small niche area, simple as that. Now, the format for tonight is going to be, as we do in other sessions, we're going to be talking, Nina's going to take us through her presentation. We've got some slides. And then we're going to be doing a Q&A with Gemma and Liza as well. Okay, so if anything occurs to you during Nina's presentation, just pop a question in the Q&A function. You'll notice we've got both the Q&A function and also the chat function on tonight's Zoom session. Questions go in the Q&A if possible, but feel free to leave comments in the chat. That's absolutely fine. As always, and I know you will be respectful. It's very much a safe space for people to make comments and also ask questions. We are recording tonight's session. I believe you might have had that warning already. And as I said earlier, please give us feedback. We are primarily lawyers rather than presenters, but these webinars are driven by what people want to hear about. So let us know. We're just devising our schedule for the next few months. So it'd be really lovely to have some feedback as to topic choices, etc. So on that note, Nina, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yep, I'm there.
Good.
Is that all working fine?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I can see you, I can hear you, and I can see your slides. So take it away.
Brilliant. Technology working. That's always the first miracle. So yeah, thank you very much, Sarah, for that lovely introduction, and thanks to Stowe for inviting me. It's a really lovely to speak to you all this evening. Just to say, not quite sure who is on the webinar tonight, and so I've covered sort of different family types and different kinds of things that can come up, but we can use the Q&A if there's any area that I haven't covered, or if you're in a particular situation that I haven't mentioned, because there's a lot of diversity in donor conception families. I've titled my talk Loss, Difference and Decision Making, because I think for people considering donor conception, they tend to be the big things that crop up, if I was trying to summarize it. And so you'll see some of these aspects: the loss, potentially having a different kind of family or making a family in a different kind of way, and all the decisions, the complex decisions around that and choices that people have to make. And you'll see that sort of filtered through the slides and through the topics. So this evening, what I'm going to cover is, I'm going to just do a little introduction on what donor conception is. Hopefully you'll hear me talk about it and you'll think, oh yeah, of course that's what it is. But just to sort of lay the groundwork, because I think that tells us why there can be some difficult decisions and sometimes difficult emotions around this route to parenthood. I'm going to talk about some of the things that need to be considered, and some of the things I talk about you might think, well, that doesn't apply to me, or that isn't how I feel about it, and other things you might think, oh yes, that's exactly what I'm going through. And there are some common themes, but obviously there's also a lot of difference, and people will experience situations differently. So I'm going to go through some of the feelings and the issues. I am going to talk about openness, which is around, you know, who are you going to talk to about this, and how you might think about whether you're going to talk to the child, when you're going to talk to the child, how you're going to talk to a child about these things, and just a little mention of why it's important. And really by the end, what I'm hoping is that you'll find some strategies of how you can build some confidence in your decision making, whatever that is, and know perhaps what the next steps might be that you're going to take. Now, as I'm talking at a lawyer event, I'm just going to also be clear. So my talk is very much focused on the social, emotional, sort of touchy-feely, psychological elements of this route to parenthood, and then I'm hopefully going to be backed up by some of the more meaty, practical, legal stuff by the other members of the team. And the missing component, I guess, is the clinic side, the treatment, the medical aspect of this. And so that's not an area that I'm going to cover. I'm really focused on how can you decide whether this is the right route for you, and what things you might want to consider. So what is donor conception? So to make a baby, I think we all know, hopefully we all know, you need a sperm, you need an egg, and then, as we put it in our kids' books, you need a nice warm tummy to grow in. So you need those three elements to make and grow a baby. And often a family, as a couple, whether that's a heterosexual couple or a same-sex couple or a single person, they can find themselves in a situation where one or more of those ingredients are either not working or they're not present, and so you don't have the bits that are going to be able to come together to make a baby. And so you're going to invite somebody else in to help. So in the case of donor conception, we would call those people donors, so whether it's an egg donor or a sperm donor. And of course, you might also have a surrogate involved. So that's the foundational bit. That's the sort of practical those are the practical elements that you need. And so there is something a bit different in that. So most families will have the person who gives the sperm and the person that gives the egg, the mum and the dad, will also be mum and dad in the family. So that connection is there, And even if the couple are separated or they're not in a romantic relationship, divorced, if one partner's dead, there's sort of a boundary around the family unit that is clear. With this route to parenthood, there is this other person or possibly other people involved, and so the boundary around the family is just slightly different. And it's the questions are around, like, who is this person, who is this donor or the surrogate, how important are they, how do you introduce them into the family story in a way that makes sense and that is truthful, but is also doesn't undermine the family that's going to be raising the child. And what are the longer term implications? So having this other person involved just means that there's there are times when that will be particularly relevant, and it's worth thinking about that, because the decision making that you're making right now will have long-term implications. So the kind of donor that you choose, the country that you have treatment in, will all set some of the legal aspects of the choices you're making, but also some of the more social and sort of how you and your child might feel about being donor conceived. So I'm going to start with some things to consider. So if you're a heterosexual couple, I think the first thing is to perhaps just pause and think, well, where are you on this journey to having a baby? It may be that you feel very differently about this route if you've got a history of lots and lots of unsuccessful fertility treatment behind you. You may be at a very low ebb, you may be exhausted, you may be financially at in a very different position. Versus, say, somebody who they know that they're going to probably need to use donor conception, perhaps for whatever reason they're aware that either their sperm or their eggs are not viable, and they're going straight into this as a choice for them, possibly even with a lot of positivity, like an excitement that, okay, there is a way that we can have a baby together. The other thing that can happen with couples is that they're perhaps not on the same page. So one of you might be very keen, the other one maybe isn't so keen. Maybe you don't quite agree on some of the decisions around donor conception, and it can be quite a tough challenge to get a couple to be at the same point and in agreement, and that might need time, that might need some space, it might need opportunities to talk things through. And I think the other thing with heterosexual couples is that for the most part, this is not how they planned to have a baby. They were expecting to make a baby together. And so there was that child, that baby A, that was supposed to arrive, however that baby might look, or B, that was how they were going to come into the family. And the decision now is that recognizing that that child is not going to come. So making a baby together isn't possible for whatever reason. And letting go of that child so that you can consider, well, is there a different child made in a different way that could come into this family, and what that child might be like, and how open you might be to considering that little person. For same-sex couples, they are also, on a journey and need to sort of stop and reflect, like, what's the history there? Have they come straight to this and full on knowing exactly what they want and what they want to do? You're both in agreement, you've made your decisions, you're just trying to find out more information to make sure that you're fully armed with all the details you need. Or perhaps you're exploring this because you're not quite sure, is this really the right route? Perhaps you're wondering, okay, we want a family, we want a baby together, but obviously there is an ingredient missing. Either there's if you're same-sex male couple, that you will need an egg and a surrogate. If you're a lesbian couple, you'll need a sperm donor. It's potentially, you may have fertility issues. We have lesbian couples in our families where they've needed to use double donation or embryo donation, because actually not only have they needed sperm, but for various reasons that they weren't able to provide the eggs either, and they need to decide who's going to carry the baby. So even within the couple, there can be some sometimes quite challenging decisions. Sometimes the answers are very easy, but sometimes it can be quite a meaty conversation that needs to be had to make those sort of decisions. There can be also some anxiety. Okay, the couple, it's going to be obvious that you didn't make a baby together. And so there may be some concerns. Well, what are people going to say? What are they going to ask? Once I announce I'm pregnant, are there going to be awkward questions? And the answer to that is yes, there can be. So, you know, sometimes it's a case of being prepared and being, you know, being open to the fact that people are often curious. I would say they're curious rather than meaning it to be intrusive. And some couples can wonder, you know, is it okay to have a family where there isn't a dad or there isn't a mum, and how might a child feel about that, and how am I going to sort of explain the situation so that it makes sense and doesn't feel, is both honest but not undermining. And for single people, there are some separate issues. So again, you know, where are you on this journey? And very often we find that single women and single men would rather have done this with a partner, not always, but often. And so that can be a big shift. Okay, I'm going to have to do this on my own, and that's not what I planned. That's not the family that I imagined. And how's that going to feel? For some single women, there's a move from sperm donation to double donation. So they've recognized they're obviously going to need to use a sperm donor, but actually when they go forward for treatment at the clinic will say, in fact, your eggs aren't really viable, and we would recommend you use an egg donor as well. And that can be quite a hard shift to move from sperm to double donation. And a bit like with the same-sex couples, there can be some thoughts around, well, what are people going to say? They're going to ask questions. And again, the answer is yes, they will, because they'll be thinking, you know, sometimes we find that the single women, the first thing that happens when they tell work that they're pregnant is, you know, people well-meaning will say, oh, fantastic, that, you know, I didn't know you were married. Or, you know, who's the lucky fella? And then it's like, okay, I don't know this person very well. What am I going to say? Am I going to say, well, actually, I'm doing this on my own, and find the language to deal with that sort of situation confidently, or you're going to just bluff it? You know, you don't have to tell everybody everything. It's quite a private, personal issue, but people will ask. There will be questions, and that's okay. Like I said, most of the time it's curiosity rather than anything intrusive. And again, you know, what about mum or dad? If you're a single person, will this child ask questions? And if so, how am I going to respond to that? And how do I feel about having a different kind of family? That's often at the heart of it, sort of building a confidence, or perhaps deciding that this isn't the right route. It's not necessarily the right route for everybody. So those are kind of more intangible sort of thinking and feeling and implications around couples and individuals and their decision making. But there are obviously a lot of practical questions and practical decisions that need to be addressed. So the first decision might be, you know, where are you going to have treatment? You're going to have to choose a clinic, and not only the clinic, but the country that the clinic's in. So some people will be having treatment here in the UK, others may be planning treatment abroad, and each different country will have different legislation in place around how the treatment is managed, and particularly around access to information about donors. On that note, so depending on where you're having treatment, you will have potentially different kinds of donors. So in the UK, a donor will always be what's called ID release. So that means that all donors have to agree that once a child is 18, that individual has the right to information, identifying information about them. So whether they act on that information, we don't know. There's no commitment to any kind of relationship or contact, but certainly contact information will be shared. And that is, in fact, it's interesting. This year we've got the first cohort of 18-year-olds will be approaching the HFEA at the end of the year. The law changed in 2005, so 18 years ago. So we've got that first batch coming through, and that will be interesting to see how all that pans out. But if you're going to somewhere like Spain, perhaps for egg donation, all the donors in Spain are anonymous, and so there's no legal requirement for the donors to have agreed to any contact, and there's no sort of there's no route, no protocol for making that kind of contact. Things are sometimes discovered by accident, but that isn't the intention for the donor or the clinic. And then in between those, or we've also got known donors, so a person that you might know personally, so it might be a family member or a friend who's willing to donate, or it might be somebody that you've made a connection through perhaps a Facebook group or online, with the express purpose of that individual becoming your donor. So known just meaning that you have you have some identifying information, you've had some kind of contact with this person, whether that's very close or a bit more distant. So that's the kind of donor that might be available. And some countries will offer, you know, a whole range of choices of different kinds. Then on a more sort of personal level, I think for most people, what they're looking for is a donor that matches something that they've identified as important for them. Very often that's around looks. So people are kind of wanting to make a baby that's going to look like it fits with the family, so it doesn't sort of obviously seem to be like a child that doesn't share the same genetic background. But there may be other qualities that you're looking for, maybe educational level, or it may be sometimes certain ethnicities or religions, or different elements that you might be wanting to choose that might be important to you. And of course, if you're planning to use surrogacy, you've also got to find a surrogate as well as an egg donor. So that can be a challenge, and that I'm not going to go into too much detail in there, and I'm not sure who's on the call, but that's another element that can be quite a tough challenge. So for all of this, I think it is also worth reflecting on how, you know, where you are, as I said at the beginning, where you are on this journey. How much emotional energy do you have for this right now? Do you need to take a pause and build up some reserves? Are you ready to go? Do you need to build a bit of a network around you? What resources have you got available? And that includes, you know, money, but also time, and also support network. So it's worth, you know, as anyone who's been through fertility treatment knows, it can be a really grueling period and a expensive, time-consuming, emotionally draining. So it's worth, before embarking, it's worth having a pause to just check in. What have we got available? How much resource pool do we have, or do I have as an individual? And just some other questions, so other situations that families can find themselves in. You may find that you may be in a situation where you've already got a child. So sometimes couples will have had baby number one and then struggle to conceive baby number two. Single people may have been in a relationship, had a child, that relationship breaks down, they'd like another child, but they're not with a partner any longer, so they're thinking about doing this solo. So then you've got other children to consider, and that might be an aspect of this journey that you're sort of weighing up. How does that difference feel? And some of the element, going back to my originals of what definition of donor conception, you're bringing this other person into the family creation. And so general feelings for you and in your family about the importance or not of genetics can also play a role. You know, for some people, those genetic connections are very, very fundamental, and breaking them, or, you know, choosing a different option just doesn't feel quite right, and that is quite common, actually. And so it could be worth exploring, well, is that a sign that actually this isn't the right route for you, or is it a sign that there's something there that needs to be unpicked, but once it's unpicked, you know, you'll have the confidence to go forward? Because I do think, you know, this isn't necessarily the right option for everybody, and so that's fine. Generally, I think there are often some worries around talking about this. It can feel quite uncomfortable. It can be quite a personal, well, it is a very personal area of life. And the thought of having to share these sort of personal decisions and personal circumstances can feel very uncomfortable. And for some people, the thought of explaining this to their child can also feel quite uncomfortable, and may wonder about, you know, do I have to tell everybody? Who do I need to tell? How am I going to find the words? When should I be telling people? So there's a whole load of decisions, and that in itself can bamboozle people because there's just too much. And hopefully what I've spoken about helps to tease apart some of those things rather than just feel like, oh gosh, there's even more things to think about than I'd perhaps imagined. So I'm going to finish that slide by asking a question, does it all need to be perfect? Because often I think that is a stumbling block for people. They know perhaps what they would like and they can't have it because the combination doesn't quite work. They can't find the donor that's quite right. Maybe the various circumstances aren't quite right. And so I think it's also worth thinking what is essential, right? We're not going to move forward unless this is in place, or this is a choice we can make, but these other things are kind of more like nice to haves. If we could, that would be great, but if not, we're happy to let that go. So to finish off, I'm just going to wrap up on feelings, so difficult feelings. So the things that come up often when talking to people who are thinking about donor conception. Now, I just want to say that I'm focusing on the challenges a little bit, and I'm doing that on purpose because I think it's worth creating a space where people can talk about the more difficult aspects. Probably all the positives, there'll be plenty of spaces for that, and certainly we have we have plenty of places where people can bring their joy as well. But I think what I'm trying to do is just to reflect some of the more difficult stuff that might be going on for people. And I think the first word that often comes up is grief. So there can be a real sense of sadness about losing that genetic connection. And that can be for both parties. So if you've got couples, there can be grief that you're not able to make a baby together. And that is what both parties had wanted. And there can be a sadness over that. And that can be true for same-sex couples too. Ideally, they probably would have preferred to make a baby together, and that's not going to happen. So there is going to be that lack of genetic connection to one child or another, for one parent or another. And that can lead to a sense of, will I feel like a real dad or a real mum if I'm not genetically related to this child? And that word real, I've put it in inverted commas because real has many meanings. And so it's a genuine concern. And sometimes that can also be connected to a fear that a child won't recognize you as a real dad or a real mum. And that might bring up worries about bonding or bring up worries around rejection once a child grows up. And there can be a lot of uncomfortable, I've mentioned it before, but a lot of uncomfortable feelings around having to talk about all these issues because they're so private. And I would just say that, we tend to try and get a balance between privacy and secrecy. So we don't want things to be secret, like a sort of shameful thing that we can't speak about. But at the same time, we're very respectful of privacy and people's needs for privacy. For solo mums and dads, not if you had planned to do this with a partner, there can be a sense that we're not a proper family because we haven't got two parents. Sometimes people can think, well, will I be, I'm going through all of this alone. And I had hoped that I'd have someone by my side supporting me. So there can be some loneliness, there can be anxiety around whether people are going to cope on their own. Going through fertility treatment is hard enough with a partner. So doing it on your own can be even more tough. And the same sort of sense of grief can come up where if you're using double donation, there can be, again, the same sort of grief that I mentioned with the heterosexual couples. And just a genuine, will I cope on my own? And that is a real question, and an important question to be able to answer, because you need to know that you can cope on your own. Sometimes the feelings are more around the donor. So there can be some anxiety about this person that you're bringing into the family in some way, and what is their role, what might the future impact on the family be if a child then has the access to that information at 18, or indeed if the child grows up and you've chosen an anonymous donor and suddenly the child says, well, I want to meet this person, or I want to know who they are, I want to know more information about them, and that can, there can be some worries about that aspect of not having information. some of the questions might be around medical issues, so it can be difficult when you can't answer those questions about the donor side. It feeds a bit into the telling and talking, because if you're not feeling confident to talk about these things, it's going to be very difficult to answer medical questions where there are gaps. And for some people, there's a sense that they are unsure that they'll be perceived and treated as an equal parent if they're not the genetic parent. And you know, there is some truth probably in that. Sometimes people do link excuse me, link families through those genetic connections, but you know, it's something that needs to be explored on an individual basis, I think, and explored in the context of the wider family, so, and the wider community. So, you know, again, some people will sit in a family where that is a really important aspect, and so that's something that just needs to be thought about before going forward with treatment, or spoken about maybe in the family. But for other families, it's really just not, you know, not an issue, not a topic. So I'm going to end on something a bit more upbeat. As I said, I've focused very much on the sort of more challenging aspects on purpose, but I certainly don't want you to go away with thinking that is it. It's just a whole bag of trouble and challenges and difficult decisions and complicated feelings. I hope that there will also be a sense of joy and excitement that potentially there is a way to have a baby, and that might be quite an exciting prospect. So who am I? I possibly should have introduced myself more thoroughly at the beginning. So yeah, I'm Nina Barnsley, and I'm the director of a charity called the Donor Conception Network. And we are 30 years old this year. We've had having our anniversary. And I think I'm just mentioning that partly to say, you know, we've been around a long time. So lots of the families that we support, that we founded the network and were supported by the network in the very early days, 30 years ago, those children have all grown up. And lots of them have had children of their own. So we've really seen that long view of what happens through the cycle of donor conception families, the telling and talking issues, the kind of curiosity that comes up in children, the feelings that parents can have. So there's lots of support out there from us. We know what we're doing. We're a biggish organisations. We produce books, we run workshops, and the main way that we support people is through our membership scheme. So, you know, do consider joining, and we then will be able to connect you with other people. Most of the membership services around community, peer support, putting members in touch with other members, and doing, you know, online chat groups on topics and conferences and local meetups, that kind of thing. So do join us if you are interested. Thank you, and over to you for questions and comments and feedback.
Wow, Nina, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. I learned a lot, actually. I really did. That was really good. Thank you. I'd like you to come back on again at some point in the future and do more on this. It's brilliant. Now, I've got a few kind of queries in my head because I'm not sure how it all works to a certain degree from a legal side, and I'm wondering if either of my specialist lawyers who are with us tonight can just give us a quick overview as to the legal issues that can arise. So, for example, when you're going on this journey, when would you need a lawyer, or what would need to happen for you to need a lawyer? What would go wrong, or just could somebody just give us a bit of an overview as to where a lawyer fits in sometimes on this journey?
Yeah. So some of the issues that arise when considering donor conception are really around who will be the legal parent of this child, and how can you ensure that the people that you want to be a legal parent or legal parents are recognised. And currently how the law is structured is that centres really around two things. Firstly, whether the marital status is important if you're considering donor conception at home through artificial insemination, and secondly, that method of conception, is it going to be an arrangement where it's artificial insemination at home, or is it going to be use of a clinic? Because of course use of a clinic involves much more regulation and protection in place, as well as health screening. Nina mentioned about medical history and things. If you use it a clinic, then you'll have the peace of mind that those screenings have been carried out. But also from a legal point of view, they will ensure that the correct consents are considered, discussions take place, and there is a written record of who will be the legal parent or parents of a child. So in terms of when somebody may wish to consider legal advice, it's certainly a good idea to have a conversation early on to make sure that what you're planning will be recognised in law in the way that you wish it to be. And certainly in considering any form of donor conception, if you're looking at any type of arrangement with a known donor, so as Nina said earlier in her presentation, it's really important to be very clear on what role that person may or may not have in that child's life, as well as their legal status, and to be very clear on people's expectations and understanding and intentions for that known donor. So yes, the sort of legal issues really focusing around legal parenthood and having good communication over refusing a known donor, what people's expectations and intentions are for that known donor's role in a child's life, if any.
Okay, and obviously there's you're determining, I suppose, boundaries and how this is going to work. Is that going to be encapsulated in a form of contract or deed or agreement, or is that ultimately, or is it a memorandum of understanding? What are we aiming for?
So when we talk about donor conception with a known donor, whether it's going to be somebody who's a single parent by choice but is having a known donor, a known sperm donor, whether it's a gay couple who are considering a platonic co-parenting relationship with the donor, or heterosexual relationship, again, where there's a known donor, then really what you're aiming for is to firstly have those conversations around, as I say, what role that person is or isn't going to play. And then, yes, it's really important and helpful, really, to record that in a document. Now, it's not going to be legally binding. It's just a document which reflects those conversations for the intentions of the future. What is important in terms of a legal document is if you're looking at using a clinic and making sure that legal parenthood, but in terms of a known donor's involvement, it's having a document that reflects those conversations, but it isn't a contract, it isn't legally binding.
Okay, so is it fair to say that issues can arise at a later date? Have you come across that?
Yes, we have come across that. I think when the issues arise, it tends to be where there has been a known donation and they potentially haven't had that conversation, or people have changed their mind later. They perhaps were a known donor and they were donating to a friend or a couple, and the intentions are clear, or as I say, they changed their mind and they want more of an involvement in a child's life than perhaps was anticipated at the time or understood to be. So yes, so we do deal with examples of where there's been a known donor and there's a dispute about the involvement of that donor in a child's life.
Yeah, I think the main issue is just managing expectations, and that's where the co-parenting agreements or donor conception agreements really come in, because it's making sure that neither party is making any assumptions and that you're both going into that arrangement with your eyes wide open and that you've considered all of the factors up front. Because if you've done that, there tends to be less scope for there being dispute further down the line, whereas where we do see disputes, it's often because those conversations just haven't been had. So one party thought A was going to happen and the other party thought B was going to happen, and they're probably both completely legitimate thoughts, but they were both just on completely separate pages.
Okay, so if you're going through this, you've got everything that Nina's kind of beautifully summarised tonight, and then you've got to get your ducks in a row legally earlier in order to ensure that everybody's on the same page and to avoid upset at a later date. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And in your experience, is it quite an easy process making sure the parties are on the same page?
I think normally when they come to see us, they could be at various stages of those discussions. Some people have had quite lengthy discussions over quite a period of time, but there may well be things that they still haven't considered or thought of, and our advice then is in supporting them in having those discussions, and enabling them to have thought it through as much as possible.
Okay. Nina, I've seen on the Donor Conception Network website, which is very good, by the way, that obviously you've got a page about some legal contacts that you've got, obviously. So there's a quick reference guide for people who've got a bit of a got in a pickle or whatever and need to seek legal advice. In your experience, what are the most common problems that arise where people would need legal advice in this area?
That's a great question, which I'm not sure we would be able to answer conclusively, because what we know is lots of people use our website as a sort of signposting tool, and they don't necessarily approach us first and then we direct them to somewhere. It's that they may just browse the website and then they have a question and then they'll contact one of the lawyers. The sort of things that do come to the office, they tend to be what Liza and Gemma were just talking about, so known donor agreements where someone's trying to make an arrangement with a friend or someone or that's their intention, is to perhaps find someone on a group of, and they're wondering what to do, and then we would definitely signpost them and say you must get some legal advice. I think the other situation that's common is obviously with surrogacy issues. So when people are thinking about using a surrogate or will definitely need a surrogate, and they will be signposted straight to the lawyer side of things, because actually that's, you know, that's almost sort of step one, is understanding how that process is going to work to make sure that the first step they take is taking them in the right direction. And then I think sadly the third kind of issue that comes up is where there is perhaps a dispute between a couples, and the donor conception element is being slightly weaponized in the divorce or in the court process. So sometimes they just may need legal advice because one partner is using the fact that the other partner is not genetically related to their child to sort of undermine their position as a parent, or the fact of telling the child is being sort of weaponized a little bit. So a couple will be arguing about whether the child should be told, and that can be a challenge, and be when there's, it's sort of when they're at war, they're not having, you know, good healthy conversations about these things. They're kind of, you know, any small thing that might have been resolved had they been amicable gets sort of exaggerated. But there are lots of other situations as well where we'll signpost them to lawyers.
Mm-hmm. Crikey, it's amazing, isn't it? Is it fair to say, and please excuse my ignorance in this area, but the majority of legislation in England and Wales in this area really will have been written over the last 20 years?
Yes. Okay. I mean, yes, I'm not a legal expert, so I'm sort of hesitant to respond sort of conclusively to any of those sort of questions. But yes, the law was, well, it was revised in 2008, 2009, and updated to change birth certification, and it's recently been updated to amend storage limits so that now you can store donor gametes for much longer, as you can store your own gametes and embryos for longer. But yes, the original law that was put in place is pretty old.
Okay, I'm just thinking
under review.
Yes.
The HFEA have agreed that it is outdated and does need review, particularly in relation to consent, as well as other aspects of treatment, fertility treatment and donor conception. And so there is a review ongoing at the moment. The consultation, I believe, is still open until towards the end of April, I think. Yeah. The original act was kind of about 30 years ago. So that was the one that sort of started to bring in, laws in relation to surrogacy and donor conception, etc. And, as Nina said, that has been amended and it's been changed over the last 20, 30 years as society has changed, but perhaps it hasn't kept up quite as quickly as we might have liked. I mean, we do have today the Law Commission published its recommendations and a draft bill for changing the surrogacy laws, so updating the surrogacy laws. So, there are changes afoot, but as with everything, I think law is pretty slow to change with societal changes.
Yes, we know that, don't we? We're very familiar with that, I'm afraid. Now, one of the reasons I'm kind of asking this is because we've had a really good question in about, and I know it's impossible to predict future changes in the law, but this question is brilliant. It's do any of you envisage any potential in the future of donor parents challenging their legal rights to a child? Now, this has been raised, I believe, because of a case that took place in the US where a donor parent was successful in a legal challenge to have some form of parental rights. Now, I'm sorry, I can't put any flesh on the bones for the case in America. But anybody, please feel free to jump in. So what do you envisage there being any change to the future of donor parents challenging their legal rights to a child?
I can't comment on the case that's in America, but we have had cases that have gone through the courts here, particularly in relation to known donors where there have been disputes. Talking about the complexity of legal parentage, there has been slightly different approach with the courts, whether the known donor was a legal parent or not. But certainly there have been cases where the known donor has been given parental responsibility. There's cases where they have been given limited contact, and there's also cases where they haven't been given anything. So it's very much on a case-by-case basis, and I think this is where the co-parenting agreements and the donor conception agreements really carry their, worth their weight in gold, because they show what the intention are of the parties at the time or around conception. And are likely to carry significant weight with the judges, even if they're not legally binding.
Okay, so it's,
and just to be clear, those are all arrangements that take place outside of a licensed clinic. So for anyone thinking about going through a licensed clinic, that is one of the reasons for doing that, because you are protected by law. It's very clear who has responsibility and rights and who doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. Again, my naivety, I hadn't realised the extent to which this goes on outside a licensed clinic environment, actually. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's quite popular. It's quite, often family and friends will step in, but also, as Nina said, there's all sorts of Facebook groups and social groups where, people will meet surrogates, they'll meet sperm donors, etc. So yeah, it is a bit of a minefield, and I think the worry legally is that if you're going through a licensed fertility clinic, you're more likely to be getting good advice and checks being done, etc. Whereas perhaps if you're having those known donor arrangements through a Facebook meetup or something along those lines, you may not completely understand the implications of the arrangement that you're getting yourself into.
I think cost has been a barrier for people, because clinics do charge, and so quite often when we speak to clients, they may well be aware, or certainly after speaking to us, they're aware of the benefits of using a clinic, but the cost of it make it prohibitive.
I see. So they're more like,
and also just to say that you can take a known donor to the clinic. So if whether that's a family member, a friend, or somebody that you have connected with to become a donor, so you can still have that protection through the clinic, but yes, at a cost. But
yeah, really interesting. That's fascinating. I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction now. Another question we've got in. I think probably Nina will go with you on this one, if that's all right. What is your view on what age you should have a conversation with a child around their origin?
Great question, and very much on point with our area of expertise, if you like. So yeah, we're very much around all the how, when, and why of being open with children. And I think our message would be, when you feel ready and confident, but as early as possible. And the earliest possible is not so much for the child. A lot of that is really for parents. So why we recommend starting that conversation before children even understand is so that parents get a chance to think about how they're going to talk about this, what words they're going to use, how they're going to frame the story. We've got some children's books that are one way to do it. You know, we wouldn't be prescriptive about it. There are lots of children's books, but we would say, you know, use ours as a springboard to finding your own way of describing it. But this is one way. And that what that means is that parents get a chance to experiment with how they're going to talk about this before a child understands what they're being told. So for a lot of people, they've been on quite a journey with this, sometimes a really emotional ups and downs, and when they start talking about it, it can come out in the storytelling. So they can get emotional, can maybe get tearful or not, you know, choke up, not be able to finish the story. Well, that doesn't matter if you're telling that story to a 2-year-old who isn't frankly paying any attention really to what you're saying, or perhaps younger, even a baby, or when you're pregnant. If you sat down with an 8-year-old and did that, the 8-year-old would clock that, you know, something wasn't quite right, or would know exactly what you were talking about, and might ask quite a challenging question that you're not ready for. So a lot of the tell early is really for parents to build that confidence, but it's also around children to make sure that as much where possible, that the information about the fact that someone else was involved in helping to make them is kind of bedded into their sense of who they are from very early on. So there isn't that sit down moment at the age of 10 or 12, 18 or 25, where you say, sit down, there's something very important I need to tell you. It's, you know, it's not that kind of information. It's information that's just drip, 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 fed over time. And so when you ask children when they found out, be like, well, I've always known, this has always been who I am. So there isn't that shift. That would be our recommendation. But equally, we've supported families who've told adult children in their 20s, 30s, even 40s, and it can go very well. So it's not to frighten people. If you've got an older child and you're thinking, have I missed the boat? No, we've got lots of resources and support that's available for that. But yeah, I think the summary would be as early as you can, and ideally before the child turns 7.
Wow, that's brilliant. I'm afraid I hadn't even really thought about it in detail. Obviously, everybody knows to go to the Donor Conception Network website, please. First port of call. Feel free to call us secondly, but yes, that website first of all. Now, I'm not sure how easy this question is to answer, and I appreciate that it will vary from place to place. But are you able to talk about the approximate costs for using a donor clinic?
Not really, because I know it's very frustrating, and we do get asked this question sometimes, but the trouble is it is so varied. You know, some people, if it's a single woman, for example, or a lesbian couple using sperm donation, the clinic may recommend IUI, so you're not even doing IVF, and that will be not expensive. And if you get pregnant the first round, you know, it's going to be a completely different kind of cost to if you're using an egg donor, you're needing IVF, and perhaps you've also been recommended a few extra tests or extra medical procedures to help you be able to conceive or help you to sustain the pregnancy. You know, they're sort of polar opposites, and there can be thousands and thousands of pounds difference. So it's very hard to say, oh, it's going to cost you this or that. And we don't sort of like to, you know, don't want to sort of say a figure and then get it wrong. I mean, I think the clinics should be and are getting better at being upfront about what the costs are, so that at least you can get some kind of a sense of how much the different treatment options will be. But even there, it does vary, and it does vary from country to country, and Sorry, annoying answer.
No, good answer. There are huge differences, and they are going to come with hugely differing results. And just thinking about it, actually, there's such a huge amount of research involved in this journey. It's a miracle people get to the end. They must be shattered. Honestly, fascinating. Can we just recap, circle back to a point that we briefly talked about earlier, or rather Nina was in your presentation, about revealing the identity of a donor when the child is 18. Now that is a piece of legislation specific to England and Wales, isn't it? So if, for example, there was a foreign donor, is the legislation, but it's a UK clinic, is that legislation, sorry, is it governed by England because it's a UK, or it's an English clinic, or is it governed by the donor being foreign?
There's a little bit of both, but basically, if you're having treatment in a UK clinic, so it is UK wide, then UK law will apply. So that means that the donor has to have agreed to be identifiable once a child turns 18, and that donor will have to comply with the 10 family limit within the UK. However, and the reason why I'm saying it's that there is a little bit of both, that donor may be being used in other countries, and so there's not quite, it's not quite clear, and sometimes the sperm banks aren't completely clear about where else that donor has been used. So within the UK, yes, all of those laws apply, but it's, the donor may have been exported to any number of countries outside the UK as well.
Okay, again, fascinating. Now, for the lovely lady who asked that question on the Q&A, I hope I've got that right and we've answered it properly. That's brilliant, thank you. Now, lawyers, any top tips of anything we haven't covered in tonight's session? Can we just have a roundup? Is there anything that you think we should cover off for people listening tonight that perhaps we haven't covered, or just your main points?
Do your research, check the legal parentage position, have those conversations. If you're using a known donor, manage those expectations, take your time to talk these things through properly and be clear that you're all on the same page.
Brilliant.
Obviously, seek the assistance of Nina and her team.
Yes.
They've got great resources.
I think we should pull resources. I think we should. Girls, I think I see your team getting bigger in the future with all these changes. I mean, the law is just going to, if it can keep up with society, it's fascinating. We better start that recruitment drive. You better start training your own people. It is fascinating. Right. I think we are now, well, now it's 6:30, so we are now really at the end of our lovely session. So thank you very much to everybody who came on board to help tonight. Nina, obviously Gemma and Liza as well. That's not it. We're always here to help with questions. Send them in, not a problem. Not to me, I'm not very good at answering these sorts of things, but I know people who are, so that's no problem. Okay. As I say, first port of call I do recommend highly is Nina's website. And Nina, thank you very much for spending time with us tonight. If your schedule allows, I'd love to have another session a bit later on in the year with the girls as well, obviously, and we can cover off a few more things as well. Once also possibly regarding the surrogacy issue, once everybody's finished reading the 600 pages or whatever that Gemma and Lisa were reading this morning that recently came out. But thank you very much for joining us, to all our lovely listeners tonight. I appreciate this being such a niche subject. This might be the only time we see you, but keep your eyes peeled, because I do think we'll be revisiting it a little bit later in the year, and let us have some feedback. If there's anything else you want us to cover, just drop us an email, not a problem. For the regular Stowe Talks people, we'll be back at the end of April. Don't have a specific topic yet, but it could be fascinating. as always. And we'll see you later on in the month. But thank you very much, team. Really enjoyed tonight. Have a lovely evening.
Thank
Thanks.
you all. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
inviting me.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye.